The gunshot echoed through the boardroom like a period at the end of a sentence. Jin-Woo Park lowered his Glock with the same controlled precision he used to sign contracts, watching the man who had betrayed his trust crumple against the marble wall. Blood bloomed across the expensive wallpaper in abstract patterns that would require complete renovation. Such was the cost of disloyalty. He straightened his charcoal suit jacket, the fabric falling into perfect alignment across his broad shoulders. At 32, Jin-Woo commanded the largest Korean organized crime syndicate on the West Coast through a combination of strategic brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. His men cleaned the mess with practiced efficiency while he checked his platinum watch. 7:30. He had a dinner reservation to keep. The restaurant knew him as Mr. Park, a successful import businessman with particular tastes. They reserved his corner table without question, understanding that his privacy was worth more than their curiosity. He preferred establishments where the staff moved like shadows and the other patrons minded their own affairs. Tonight, he needed the illusion of normalcy after the afternoon's necessary violence. Amara Washington moved through her section with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to read a room's mood from across a crowded space. 5 years of military service had trained her to assess threats and calculate distances, skills that serve her well in the upscale restaurant where entitlement often masked danger. She noticed everything. The businessman at table 12 who counted his money twice. The woman at the bar whose eyes never stopped scanning exits. The impeccably dressed Korean man at table 7 who sat with his back to the wall and kept his hands visible. At 28, Amara possessed the kind of quiet strength that drew second glances without demanding attention. Her dark skin held the warmth of summer evenings, and her movements carried the controlled precision of someone who had faced real danger and emerged stronger. She had traded military fatigue for the restaurant's required black uniform, but she still moved like a soldier. Some instincts never faded. Where are you watching this story unfold tonight? And does the tension between power and protection resonate with your own experiences of reading people in crowded places? She approached Jin-Woo's table with professional courtesy, noting the expensive cut of his suit and the way he held himself like a man accustomed to command. His dark eyes tracked her approach with an intensity that made her briefly wonder what kind of import business required such alertness. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the controlled warmth she used with clients who radiated controlled danger. "Can I start you with something to drink?" His gaze lingered on her face with the analytical quality of someone who read people for survival. "Macallan 18, neat." His accent carried the crisp precision of expensive education layered over something harder. She nodded and turned toward the bar, unaware that Jin-Woo watched her retreat with the same focused attention he applied to potential assets. There was something about her bearing that spoke of training beyond restaurant service. The way she moved suggested someone who could handle herself in situations where composed professionalism might not be enough. The Macallan arrived in a crystal tumbler that caught the ambient light like liquid amber. Jin-Woo accepted it with a slight nod, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment. Her skin was warm, and she didn't flinch from contact with a stranger. Interesting. The restaurant's evening rhythm continued around them, the soft murmur of conversation punctuated by the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Jin-Woo's presence commanded respect without demanding attention, the mark of someone who understood that true power often moved in whispers rather than shouts. Amara returned twice more to check on his needs, each interaction brief, but charged with an undercurrent she couldn't quite identify. He spoke little, but listened with complete attention, his dark eyes tracking details that others might miss. When she brought his dinner, perfectly prepared beef with seasonal vegetables arranged like art on bone china, he thanked her with a formality that felt almost ceremonial. The attack came without warning. 5 men in dark clothing burst through the restaurant's main entrance, their faces covered by black masks that transformed them into faceless instruments of violence. The lead man carried a modified assault rifle, its barrel shortened for close quarters work. Behind him, his companions spread out with military precision, sealing exits and controlling sightlines. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Screams pierced the air as diners dove beneath tables, expensive wine glasses shattering against marble floors in crystalline explosions. The maitre d' reached for the phone and found himself staring down the barrel of a pistol before his fingers touched the receiver. Jean Wu's reaction was immediate and deadly. The man who had been calmly enjoying his dinner vanished, replaced by a predator whose every movement spoke of lethal training. He upended his table with controlled force, creating cover while his right hand moved to the shoulder holster concealed beneath his tailored jacket. Amara's military training kicked in with the automatic precision of muscle memory. While other staff members froze or fled, she moved with calculated purpose toward the service entrance, her mind already cataloging exits and calculating fields of fire. Years of deployment had taught her that survival often depended on thinking while others panicked. The lead gunman's weapon tracked toward Jean Wu's position, but the crime boss had already moved. His Glock appeared with fluid grace, and his first shot took the man's center mass, dropping him before he could fully acquire his target. The assault rifle clattered across expensive hardwood, its weight carrying it into the kitchen entrance. The remaining attackers opened fire, muzzle flashes strobing through the restaurant's elegant atmosphere like deadly fireworks. Bullets shredded upholstery and sparked off marble columns, filling the air with the acrid smell of gunpowder and fear. Jean Wu moved like liquid violence, using overturned tables and architectural features for cover while returning precise fire. Each shot was deliberate, calculated for maximum effect with minimal collateral damage. He had not survived 15 years in organized crime by being reckless with civilian lives. Amara found herself pinned behind the bar as gunfire erupted overhead, crystal decanters exploding in showers of glass and premium liquor. Her combat experience told her the attackers were professionals, their movement patterns suggesting military or police training. This was not a robbery. This was an assassination attempt. She watched Jean Wu fight with the cold efficiency of someone who had killed before and would kill again. His movements were economical, purposeful, each action serving the ultimate goal of survival. When his magazine ran empty, he reloaded with practiced speed while maintaining visual contact with his enemies. A gunman flanked left, trying to catch Jean Wu from his blind side. Amara saw the threat developing and acted on instinct. She grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray from the bar and hurled it with the accuracy born of countless training hours. The improvised projectile struck the gunman's temple with satisfying force, sending him sprawling and buying Jean Wu the seconds he needed to engage the threat. Their eyes met across the chaos, recognition passing between them like an electric current. In that moment, Jean Wu understood that Amara Washington was not simply a waitress caught in crossfire. She was a soldier who had chosen to fight beside him. The battle ended as suddenly as it began. Jean Wu's final shot dropped the last attacker, leaving 5 bodies scattered across what had been an elegant dining room. Silence descended like a heavy curtain, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens and the quiet sobs of traumatized diners. Jean Wu holstered his weapon and moved toward Amara with predatory grace, his dark suit unmarked by violence despite the carnage surrounding them. Blood decorated his face in thin lines where flying glass had found its mark, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "You move like military," he said, his voice carrying the same controlled authority he had used to order dinner. "What unit?" Amara met his gaze without flinching, recognizing that her civilian cover had been thoroughly blown. "Army Special Forces, 82nd Airborne, 3 tours in Afghanistan." He nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place behind intelligent eyes. "Those men came for me. Now they will come for you. You cannot go home tonight." The implications hit her like ice water. By helping him, by revealing her capabilities, she had painted a target on her own back. The professional killers who had tried to eliminate Jean Wu would not leave loose ends, and she had very clearly demonstrated that she was more than an innocent bystander. Sirens grew louder, emergency vehicles converging on the scene with increasing urgency. Jin Woo's men would arrive first, she realized, understanding that a man of his obvious resources would have contingency plans for exactly this scenario. You have perhaps 30 seconds to decide, Jin Woo continued, his tone carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Come with me now, and I will protect you. Stay here, and you'll be dead before sunrise. Choose wisely, Amara Washington. He knew her name. Of course he did. Men like Jin Woo did not survive by leaving details to chance, and she had clearly been under observation longer than she realized. The restaurant, her shifts, her routines, all of it cataloged and assessed by an organization that treated information as currency. Amara looked around the destroyed restaurant, at the bodies cooling on expensive marble, at the other staff members who stared at her with new understanding. Her quiet life, serving dinner to wealthy clientele, had ended the moment she chose to fight instead of hide. She could hear vehicles outside, doors slamming, boots on pavement. Time was running out, and indecision would be just another form of suicide. I go with you, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was accepting. Jin Woo smiled for the first time that evening, the expression transforming his face from coldly handsome to genuinely dangerous. Smart woman. Now we run. The black Mercedes moved through Seattle's streets with predatory silence, its bulletproof windows reflecting the city lights like dark mirrors. Amara sat in the passenger's seat, hyper-aware of Jin Woo's control presence behind the wheel and the weight of the decision she had made in 30 seconds of chaos. Behind them, 3 identical vehicles followed in precise formation, their occupants invisible but undoubtedly armed. Jin Woo drove with the same calculated precision he had shown in combat, his movements economical and purposeful. The expensive leather interior carried the subtle scent of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine that spoke of power carefully contained. He had shed his blood-stained suit jacket, revealing the shoulder holster and the lean musculature of someone who maintained combat readiness despite his corporate facade. Your throw was textbook, he said without taking his eyes from the road. Distance, accuracy, follow-through. Not something they teach in restaurant training. Amara kept her hands steady in her lap, fighting the urge to check the exits they passed. Old habits. Softball team in high school. Good arm. He smiled slightly, the expression carrying no warmth. Try again. That ashtray weighed 3 pounds. You calculated trajectory, compensated for moving target, and achieved precise impact on a stress point. Softball does not teach tactical, improvised weapons deployment. The Mercedes turned into an underground parking garage beneath a gleaming high-rise, descending into depths that spoke of serious security considerations. Motion sensors tracked their descent, while cameras recorded every angle. Amara noted the reinforced concrete walls, the strategic placement of defensive positions, the multiple escape routes. This was not simply expensive real estate. This was a fortress. 82nd Airborne, she said finally, accepting that further deception would be pointless. 3 deployments, specialized in close-quarters combat and tactical reconnaissance. Jin Woo nodded, as if confirming information he already possessed. What years? 2015 through 2020. Discharged with honors after IED incident left me with permanent hearing damage in my left ear. They emerged from the garage into a private elevator that required both key card and biometric scan. The walls were polished steel that reflected their images in fractured multiplicity, creating the illusion of an army of Jeans and Amaras ascending into unknown territory. The penthouse revealed Jin Woo's true nature through careful details that spoke louder than words. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of Elliott Bay, while the furniture combined modern elegance with strategic positioning that allowed constant visual control of all entry points. Art that appeared purely aesthetic revealed itself as tactical advantage when examined closely. Nothing existed without purpose. Amara cataloged defensive features automatically, her military training asserting itself despite the luxury surrounding her. The apartment could be defended by a small team almost indefinitely, with multiple escape routes and communication arrays that suggested connections far beyond local law enforcement reach. "Sit," Jean Wu instructed, indicating a chair positioned to give her a view of the windows while keeping him between her and the most obvious exit. He moved to a wet bar that looked like modern sculpture but probably concealed serious firepower. "Scotch or wine?" "I do not drink on duty." "You're not on duty. You're under my protection, which means you follow my rules." "Scotch or wine?" The distinction carried weight that settled in her stomach like lead. Protection implied obligation. An obligation in Jean Wu's world would come with prices she had not yet calculated. "Scotch." He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid that caught the city lights like liquid gold, then settled into the chair opposite her with predatory grace. His dark eyes studied her face with the intensity of someone who read survival in microexpressions. "Tell me about Operation Copper Moon," he said casually, as if discussing weather. Amara's glass stopped halfway to her lips, the scotch suddenly tasting like smoke and memory. Copper Moon was classified, buried so deep that even she did not know all the players involved. How does a Korean crime boss know about Army Special Forces operations in Afghanistan? Your unit eliminated a high-value target in Kandahar province. A man who coordinated weapons trafficking between Taliban forces and international criminal organizations. His name was Hassan Azari, and he was my business partner. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the luxury trappings transformed into expensive cage bars. Amara set down her glass with hands that remained perfectly steady through sheer force of will. That operation was legitimate military action against enemy combatants. Jean Wu's smile carried the cold beauty of winter moonlight on steel. Legitimate is relative. Hassan provided me with modified weapons and specialized ammunition. His death cost my organization considerable revenue and strategic advantage. The 5 men who attacked the restaurant tonight were his surviving associates, seeking revenge for their dead leader. She had walked into a trap 15 years in the making, drawn by circumstances that stretched back to dusty Afghan mountains and decisions made by superior officers whose names she had never known. The restaurant attack had not been random violence. It had been carefully orchestrated payback that turned her from protector to target with military precision. "They followed me," she said, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Tracked my location, learned my routines, waited for the right moment to strike when I would be in proximity to you." Correct. Hassan's men are patient and thorough. They spent months identifying every member of your unit, learning your post-service lives, mapping your vulnerabilities. You were marked for elimination the moment you pulled that trigger in Kandahar. The scotch burned like liquid fire, but not as much as the realization that her quiet civilian life had been an illusion. Every shift at the restaurant, every routine errand, every moment of assumed safety had been conducted under the watchful eyes of professional killers who viewed her death as unfinished business. "So what happens now?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "You turn me over to them as gesture of good faith." Jean Wu leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them like controlled electricity. "I eliminate threats to what is mine. You chose to fight beside me rather than hide behind a bar. That makes you valuable. It also makes you my responsibility." The possessive undertone in his voice carried implications that made her military instincts prickle with warning. Protection from Jean Wu would come with strings attached, obligations that might prove more dangerous than the enemies currently hunting her. "I did not ask for protection." "No, you asked for nothing, which makes your assistance tonight more valuable than purchased loyalty. Hassan's men will not stop hunting you. They cannot afford to leave witnesses to their failure, and they certainly cannot allow an American soldier to escape consequences for their leader's death." Through the windows, Seattle sprawled beneath them like a circuit board of light and shadow. Somewhere in that urban landscape, professional killers were regrouping, planning their next move against a target who had just revealed capabilities they had not anticipated. Amara's apartment would be watched. Her friends would be questioned. Her few remaining family members would become potential leverage points. "What are your terms?" she said finally, accepting the reality that independence was a luxury she could no longer afford. "You remain here under my protection. You provide tactical consultation on security matters related to my business operations. You do not leave this building without escort. You do not communicate with outside contacts without approval. You follow my instructions without question or delay." The terms settled around her like invisible chains, each condition designed to transform her from free agent to protected asset. She understood the logic even as she resented the necessity. Jin Woo's enemies were now her enemies, his battles her battles, his world her only sanctuary. How long? Until Hassan's remaining associates are eliminated, or until they accept that pursuing you is more costly than abandoning their vendetta. Weeks, months, perhaps longer. The apartment's luxury suddenly felt like expensive captivity, beautiful bars on a cage designed to keep her safe and under control simultaneously. Jin Woo watched her process the implications with the patient attention of someone who understood that acceptance required time to fully form. "I have a choice," she said, though they both knew the statement was more question than declaration. "You have the choice to accept protection and live, or reject it and die. Those are your only options." Hassan's men are professionals who do not abandon contracts simply because their first attempt failed. Amara stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights that suddenly seemed more distant than stars. Behind her reflection, she could see Jin Woo waiting with the stillness of a predator that knew patience often determined survival. He had offered her safety at the cost of freedom, protection in exchange for submission to his authority. The alternative was death, probably within hours of leaving his fortress. Hassan's associates would not make the mistake of underestimating her twice, and she could not fight an entire organization while maintaining civilian cover that had already been blown beyond recovery. "I accept your terms," she said without turning around. "Smart woman. My housekeeper will show you to your room and provide appropriate clothing. Dinner is served at 8. Do not be late." The dismissal carried the weight of command, and Amara recognized that her new reality had officially begun. She was no longer Amara Washington, waitress and former soldier, trying to build a quiet civilian life. She was now Jin Woo's protected asset, valuable enough to keep alive and dangerous enough to require careful management. As she moved toward the hallway, where a silent Korean woman waited with professional courtesy, Amara caught Jin Woo's reflection in the window glass. He watched her retreat with the satisfied expression of someone who had just acquired exactly what he needed. The cage door had closed with the soft click of expensive locks, and she had walked inside willingly because the alternative was immediate death. Now she would learn whether Jin Woo's protection was salvation or simply a more comfortable form of captivity. Either way, her war was far from over. Dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid silver, illuminating the spare elegance of the guest suite that had become Amara's beautiful prison. She had awakened at 0500 hours as automatically as breathing, her internal clock unchanged by luxury Egyptian cotton sheets or the distant hum of Seattle traffic 40 stories below. Military discipline did not fade with discharge papers. The clothing provided by Jin Woo's silent housekeeper hung in the walk-in closet with the precision of a quartermaster's inventory. Designer casual wear in blacks and grays, perfectly fitted as if someone had studied her measurements with professional thoroughness. She chose dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that allowed freedom of movement while maintaining the understated elegance that seemed to be house policy. The penthouse revealed new details in morning light. What had appeared purely decorative the night before now showed its tactical purpose. The kitchen knives were German steel capable of combat application. The fireplace tools were weighted for defensive use. Even the sculptures positioned throughout the living space could serve as improvised weapons by someone with appropriate training. Jin Woo emerged from the master wing at precisely 0600, his appearance suggesting he maintained the same rigid schedule that governed her own morning routine. He wore charcoal workout gear that emphasized the lean musculature of someone who treated physical fitness as operational necessity rather than vanity. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and his movements carried the controlled energy of contained violence. "Good morning," he said with formal courtesy that established boundaries while acknowledging her presence. "I trust you slept adequately." "Like a baby," she replied, though they both understood the lie. Her dreams had been filled with Afghan dust and the sound of Hassan's men speaking in languages she recognized from deployment zones where American soldiers learned to sleep with one eye open. He nodded toward the gym visible through glass doors that offered no privacy but complete visual access. "I maintain a morning training regimen. You are welcome to join me or use the equipment when I'm finished." The invitation carried the weight of assessment, and Amara recognized that Jinwoo was curious about her capabilities beyond the brief demonstration she had provided during the restaurant attack. She followed him into the gym, noting the military-grade equipment that suggested his organization took physical preparedness seriously. Jinwoo's workout routine revealed the source of his controlled lethality. He moved through combat drills with practiced efficiency, his strikes precise and economical. No guastid motion, no unnecessary fleris. Each technique designed for maximum damage with minimal exposure. Watching him work was like observing a master craftsman perfecting his art through endless repetition. When he finished, sweat gleaming on his skin like liquid obsidian, he stepped aside with a gesture that invited her participation. Amara approached the heavy bag with professional interest, testing its weight and balance before settling into her own routine. Her first combination landed with satisfying impact, the bag shuddering under controlled violence that spoke of hours spent perfecting technique under desert suns and mountain snow. She moved with fluid grace, each strike flowing into the next like deadly choreography. The rhythm of impact became meditative, muscle memory taking over while conscious thought drifted to safer territory. Jinwoo watched from the sidelines with growing interest. Her form was textbook perfect, but more importantly, she fought with the calm focus of someone who had killed in close quarters and understood that survival often depended on precision under pressure. When she finished 20 minutes later, breathing controlled and form still perfect, he nodded with something approaching approval. "Impressive. Your instructors were thorough. The best the Army had to offer," she replied, using the towel he provided to wipe sweat that felt cleaner than any she had produced since leaving military service. "Combat training was my specialty before they moved me to reconnaissance." They moved to the kitchen where Jinwoo's housekeeper had prepared breakfast with the efficiency of someone who understood that her employer's schedule brooked no delays. Fresh fruit, coffee that smelled like liquid paradise, and Korean dishes that spoke of cultural identity maintained despite years in American exile. Over the meal, conversation developed with the careful precision of two predators learning to share territory. Jinwoo spoke of his organization with clinical detachment, describing business operations that sounded almost legitimate until examined closely. Import and export, he explained, required careful relationship management and strategic positioning in competitive markets. Amara found herself drawn into tactical discussions despite her reservations about his methods. His questions about military logistics and operational security revealed a keen intelligence that appreciated expertise regardless of its source. When she suggested modifications to his security protocols based on asymmetric warfare principles learned in Afghanistan, he listened with complete attention. "You think like a soldier," he observed over coffee that had grown cold during their strategic debate. "Most civilians cannot comprehend the mathematics of control violence. Most civilians never had to calculate kill zones while eating breakfast," she replied, then immediately regretted the admission of vulnerability. Jinwoo's expression shifted subtly, revealing something almost like understanding beneath his controlled exterior. "The men you killed in Afghanistan. You remember their faces." It was not a question, and Amara recognized that Jinwoo understood the weight that came with taking human life in service to larger purposes. "Some memories," she said carefully, are harder to leave behind than others. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jin Woo's lieutenant, a lean Korean man whose deference did not quite mask his predatory competence. He spoke in rapid Korean, his tone suggesting urgency despite the respectful volume. Jin Woo's responses were equally measured, but Amara caught enough familiar tactical terminology to understand they were discussing threat assessment and resource allocation. Problem? She asked when the lieutenant departed with a bow that managed to be both respectful and efficiently dismissive. Hassan's associates have made contact with local criminal organizations. They are offering significant compensation for information about American military veterans living in the Seattle area. Jin Woo's expression carried the cold calculation of someone who treated threats as mathematical problems requiring precise solutions. How many veterans live in King County alone? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be strategically problematic. Thousands. But how many possess your specific skill set and match the physical description they are circulating? Perhaps a dozen, maybe less. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, its luxury transformed into expensive isolation that might not prove sufficient against determined enemies with local resources. Amara moved to the windows, studying the Seattle skyline with tactical eyes that automatically identified potential sniper positions and approach routes. Your military experience included intelligence analysis, Jin Woo said, joining her at the window. What would you do if you were hunting someone like yourself? Narrow the search parameters. Cross-reference military service records with current employment data. Focus on women who serve in Afghanistan during the relevant time period. Monitor known veteran gathering places and support services. She paused, recognizing the implications of her own analysis. They will find me eventually if they are patient and systematic. Unless we find them first. Jin Woo's voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had eliminated threats before they could fully develop. My organization excels at locating people who prefer to remain hidden. The statement hung between them like an implicit threat and an offered alliance simultaneously. Amara understood that Jin Woo was proposing active collaboration rather than passive protection, a shift that would transform her from hidden asset to operational partner in a war she had not chosen but could no longer avoid. That night, sleep eluded her despite exhaustion that reached bone-deep levels. Every shadow held potential threat, every sound suggested approaching danger. When the nightmare finally came, it arrived with the familiar intensity of memory, transformed into psychological warfare. She was back in Kandahar province, the taste of dust and diesel fuel sharp in her mouth. Hassan's compound spread before her like a deadly maze of mud walls and hidden sniper positions. The mission briefing had been clear. High-value target. Eliminate with extreme prejudice. No prisioneiros, no witnesses, no complications. The shot had been clean, professional, necessary. Hassan's death had disrupted weapons trafficking networks that supplied Taliban forces with modified ammunition designed to defeat American body armor. Strategic success by any military measure. But in the dream, Hassan's face morphed into Jin Woo's, and the dusty Afghan compound became the elegant Seattle restaurant. She was pulling the trigger again, watching life drain from dark eyes that had offered her protection and asked for loyalty in return. Amara jerked awake with a gasp that sounded too loud in the pre-dawn silence, her heart hammering with adrenaline that demanded action against threats that existed only in memory. Sweat cooled rapidly in the air-conditioned apartment, leaving her shivering despite the expensive bedding. The soft knock on her door came before she could fully orient herself, and Jin Woo's voice carried through the heavy wood with careful concern. "Are you injured?" She wrapped the silk robe around herself and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, fully dressed despite the early hour. His dark eyes took in her disheveled appearance with clinical assessment that missed nothing important. "Nightmare," she said simply, understanding that further explanation would be both unnecessary and potentially revealing. "Combat dreams," he said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who spoke from personal experience. They fade with time, but never completely disappear. The admission surprised her, revealing a crack in his controlled facade that suggested Jin-Woo Park, criminal mastermind and cold-blooded killer, still wrestled with ghosts of his own making. The vulnerability lasted only a moment before his expression returned to neutral professionalism, but the glimpse had been enough to shift something fundamental between them. "Thank you for checking on me," she said, meaning it more than she had expected. He nodded once, a gesture that carried weight beyond simple courtesy. Sleep is a tactical necessity. If the dreams continue to interfere with your rest, there are methods to address the issue. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implications about the kind of methods a man like Jin-Woo might employ to ensure his assets remained operationally effective. But beneath the clinical consideration, Amara detected something that might have been genuine concern for her well-being rather than simple protection of valuable property. "I will manage," she said, though they both knew the statement was more hope than certainty. As he turned to leave, Jin-Woo paused at the threshold. Hassan was a monster who sold weapons designed to kill American soldiers. Your unit performed a service that saved lives, regardless of the personal cost. Remember that when the dreams become too heavy to carry alone. The words followed her back into the darkness of her temporary sanctuary, carrying more comfort than she had expected from a man whose own hands were stained with blood from choices made in service to goals she did not fully understand. For the first time since the restaurant attack, she slept without nightmares, protected by understanding that some burdens were easier to bear when shared with someone who carried similar weight. The war room occupied the penthouse's east wing, its walls lined with monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds from across the Pacific Northwest. Amara studied the tactical displays with growing appreciation for Jin-Woo's organizational sophistication. This was not the crude operation of street-level criminals, but rather a multinational enterprise that operated with military precision and corporate efficiency. Jin-Woo stood before the central display, his dark suit exchanged for casual clothing that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. Intelligence reports flowed across multiple screens in Korean, English, and what appear to be coded numerical sequences that suggested communications intercept for various law enforcement agencies. "Your background in reconnaissance," he said without turning around, "included signals intelligence and pattern analysis. 3 years specializing in network infiltration and data correlation. Why do you ask?" He gestured toward a secondary monitor displaying communication patterns between known criminal organizations across the Seattle metropolitan area. Hassan's associates have been more active than initially assessed. They are not simply seeking revenge for their leader's death. They want something specific that he possessed before your unit eliminated him. Amara moved closer to the display, her analytical training automatically processing the data streams with professional interest. The communication patterns showed coordination between groups that normally operated as competitors, united by shared interest in acquiring something valuable enough to override territorial disputes. "What kind of something?" she asked, though unease was already building in her stomach like cold mercury. Jin-Woo's expression hardened with the controlled fury of someone who had discovered betrayal in unexpected places. "Military intelligence." Hassan was not simply trafficking weapons to Taliban forces. He was selling classified American battle plans and troop movement data to highest bidders across multiple conflict zones. The implication hit her like physical impact. Operation Copper Moon had not been routine elimination of a weapons trafficker. They had killed a man who was actively selling American soldiers' lives to enemy forces, and now his associates wanted to recover whatever intelligence cache he had maintained as insurance against exactly this scenario. "The laptop," she said, memory crystallizing around details that had seemed insignificant during mission debrief. "Hassan was working on a laptop when we breached the compound. Military-grade encryption, custom hardware. We assumed it contained financial records." Jin-Woo turned to face her fully, his dark eyes reflecting the cold calculation of someone who had just identified the true scope of their problem. That laptop contained 15 years of classified intelligence transactions, unit deployments, operational security protocols, safe house locations, agent identities. Everything Hassan needed to maintain his network, and everything his successors need to continue operations. Where is it now? She asked, though she suspected the answer would complicate their situation exponentially. Unknown. Your unit reported the laptop destroyed during the firefight, but Hassan's associates believe otherwise. They think you or your teammates recovered classified materials and are now attempting to auction them to rival intelligence services. Amara sank into one of the leather chairs positioned around the tactical display, the weight of 15 years of hidden consequences settling on her shoulders like lead blankets. Her unit had been thorough in their destruction of Hassan's compound, but battlefield conditions did not always allow for perfect intelligence recovery protocols. We never found any laptop, she said carefully, reviewing memories that had been carefully compartmentalized to avoid exactly this kind of operational security breach. Everything was destroyed by thermite charges before we extracted. Jean Wu's lieutenant entered with silent efficiency, carrying a tablet that he presented with the respectful urgency reserved for critical intelligence updates. The conversation that followed was conducted in rapid Korean, but Amara caught enough tactical terminology to understand they were discussing surveillance reports and threat assessment escalation. When the lieutenant departed, Jean Wu's expression carried the grim satisfaction of someone whose worst suspicions had been confirmed. Hassan's people have made contact with a rival Korean organization. The Jade Brotherhood specializes in intelligence acquisition and has connections with Chinese military intelligence services. The situation was metastasizing beyond simple revenge killing into international intelligence warfare with consequences that could reach far beyond her personal safety. Amara recognized the strategic implications even as she struggled to process the magnitude of what her unit's successful mission had inadvertently triggered. "How many of my teammates are still alive?" she asked, dreading the answer. Jean Wu consulted his tablet with clinical efficiency. Of the 12-person unit that conducted Operation Copper Moon, 4 died in subsequent deployments. 3 have been killed in apparent accidents within the past 6 months. 2 have disappeared completely, and 3 remain unaccounted for, including yourself. The mathematics of systematic elimination painted a picture that made her stomach clench with more than fear. Professional killers were working through her former unit with methodical thoroughness, eliminating potential witnesses to whatever intelligence Hassan had actually possessed before his death. "They are saving me for last," she said, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "Because they think I know where the laptop is. Or because you're the most difficult target to locate and eliminate. Your post-service life was deliberately unremarkable, your civilian identity carefully maintained." Jean Wu's voice carried professional admiration for operational security practices. "Most of your former teammates were easier to track through veteran benefits and family connections. The apartment's luxury suddenly felt like inadequate protection against enemies who had spent years planning systematic elimination of witnesses to their leader's death. Jean Wu's resources were impressive, but they were facing adversaries with international reach and decades of operational experience. "What do you recommend?" she asked, accepting that her survival now depended entirely on Jean Wu's tactical expertise and organizational capabilities. "We eliminate Hassan's associates before they can complete their mission. My organization excels at locating and neutralizing threats to our operations, and you have now become integral to our operational security." The possessive undertone in his voice had deepened, and Amara realized that somewhere during their tactical discussions and shared professional respect, Jean Wu's motivation had shifted from protecting valuable asset to safeguarding something more personally important. That evening, they shared dinner prepared by his housekeeper with ingredients that reflected careful attention to both Korean culinary traditions and American preferences. The meal provided opportunity for conversation that moved beyond tactical necessities into more personal territory, though both remained careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Jean Wu described his organization's evolution from traditional criminal enterprise into sophisticated international business operation, his pride in the transformation evident despite his typically controlled delivery. Amara found herself sharing stories of military life that revealed the camaraderie and dedication that had made her deployment years simultaneously the most challenging and most meaningful of her life. "Your hands," he said during a pause in conversation, his gaze focused on the faint scars that decorated her knuckles and palm. "Combat injuries. IED fragments. Afghanistan, 2018. She had become accustomed to the marks that serve as permanent reminders of the day her convoy had been targeted by explosives hidden in roadside debris. Most people never noticed, but Jean Wu saw details that others missed. Without asking permission, he reached across the table and took her left hand in both of his, examining the scar patterns with the careful attention of someone who understood that such marks told stories about survival and sacrifice. His touch was surprisingly gentle, fingers tracing the raised skin with clinical interest that gradually shifted into something more personal. "You were fortunate," he said quietly. "These could have been much worse." The medic said the same thing. Amara found herself reluctant to withdraw her hand from his careful exploration, surprised by the comfort she derived from his acceptance of imperfections that had made her self-conscious in civilian company. "I have similar reminders," Jean Wu admitted, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a complex pattern of scars that spoke of knife work done with intent to cause maximum damage. Rival organization attempted to send a message about territorial boundaries. They learned that some messages are better delivered in person. His scars were more extensive than hers, deliberate torture marks that suggested his enemies had taken time to inflict pain before he had presumably turned the tables with characteristic lethal efficiency. The sight triggered unexpected protective instincts that had no place in their professional arrangement. "How did you escape?" she asked, though she suspected the answer would reveal more about Jean Wu's capacity for violence than she might be comfortable knowing. "I did not escape. I eliminated every person involved in my capture, retrieved the information they had extracted under duress, and ensured that their organization understood the consequences of targeting my people." Jean Wu's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone who treated extreme violence as routine business practice. The admission should have triggered alarm, but instead Amara found herself appreciating the absolute certainty that Jean Wu would protect what he considered his with ruthless efficiency. In a world where enemies had spent years systematically eliminating her former teammates, such dedication to loyal defense felt more comforting than frightening. As they moved from the dining room to the living area, continuing conversation over wine that tasted like liquid sophistication, Amara realized that her initial resistance to Jean Wu's control had been gradually replaced by growing trust in his competence, and something approaching affection for the careful way he balanced respect for her capabilities with determination to ensure her safety. When she retired to her suite that night, she found a secure satellite phone on her bedside table along with a note written in Jean Wu's precise handwriting. "For emergencies only. Speed dial 1 reaches me directly regardless of circumstances." The gesture represented more than operational security. It was an acknowledgement that their relationship had evolved beyond protector and protected into something approaching partnership, complete with the trust and mutual dependence that such collaboration required. For the first time since the restaurant attack, Amara fell asleep without checking the locks or positioning herself with clear sight lines to all exits. Jean Wu's protection felt absolute enough to allow the luxury of genuine rest, and the knowledge that he would respond to her call with immediate and overwhelming force provided comfort that had been absent from her life since leaving military service. Outside, Seattle's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in that urban landscape, enemies continued planning her death with methodical patience. But within Jean Wu's fortress, surrounded by luxury that masked lethal defensive capability, she had found something that felt dangerously close to home. The emergency alert pierced through the penthouse at 0300 hours, red warning lights bathing the elegant living space in pulsing crimson that transformed luxury into battlefield conditions. Amara came awake instantly, muscle memory overriding sleep as her hand moved automatically toward the nightstand, where she had begun keeping the tactical knife Jin Woo had provided for close quarters defense. Jin Woo's voice echoed through the intercom system with controlled urgency that carried over the electronic wailing of multiple security systems engaging simultaneously. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Threat level critical. She dressed in seconds, choosing dark clothing that would not compromise stealth operations, then moved through the apartment toward the war room, where Jin Woo stood surrounded by monitors displaying tactical data that painted a picture of coordinated assault from multiple directions. His dark eyes reflected the red warning lights like chips of obsidian, and his movements carried the controlled violence of someone who had shifted completely into combat mode. Hassan's people have allied with the J Brotherhood, he said without preamble, indicating thermal imaging displays that showed armed teams positioned around the building's perimeter. 43 hostiles with military-grade equipment and what appears to be inside knowledge of our defensive protocols. The tactical display revealed the sophistication of the assault force with chilling clarity. Sniper teams on adjacent rooftops, explosive specialists targeting structural weak points, assault teams positioned to breach from multiple vectors simultaneously. This was not simple revenge killing, but rather a military operation designed to eliminate all witnesses and recover whatever intelligence Hassan's associates believe she possessed. Evacuation protocol is already in motion, Jin Woo continued, moving to a weapons locker that opened with his biometric signature. My helicopter will extract you to a safe house in Vancouver within 20 minutes. Amara watched him load magazines with practiced efficiency, noting the professional-grade firearms that suggested his organization maintained military-level armament for exactly this scenario. No, she said quietly. Jin Woo's hands stilled on the ammunition he was organizing, his dark gaze lifting to meet hers with surprise that rapidly shifted towards something approaching anger. This is not negotiable. Your safety requires immediate extraction to secure territory. My safety requires that you survive this attack, because without your protection network, I am dead within hours regardless of how far you evacuate me. She moved closer to the weapons locker, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had made tactical decisions under fire. I am not running while you fight my war. This is not your war. These are my enemies seeking to eliminate a threat to my operations. Your enemies who want me dead because of something I allegedly know about Hassan's intelligence cache. My former teammates who have been systematically murdered because of an operation I participated in. My war, my choice, my responsibility. She met his gaze directly, understanding that this moment would define the nature of their partnership going forward. I stay and fight. Jin Woo's expression cycled through emotions too quickly to identify individual components, but the final result carried grudging respect mixed with protective fury. Very well, but you follow my tactical command without question or hesitation. One mistake could kill us both. The building shuddered as the first explosive charge detonated against the parking garage structure, sending vibrations through 40 stories of reinforced concrete and steel. Emergency lighting engaged automatically, casting everything in stark white illumination that eliminated shadows but created new visual distortions. Jin Woo's tactical team moved with fluid precision, taking defensive positions that had clearly been rehearsed until they achieved muscle memory status. Amara noted the professional competence with appreciation born of military experience, understanding that Jin Woo's people were not street criminals, but rather trained soldiers who happened to work outside legal boundaries. The assault began in earnest as Hassan's allies breached the building's lower defenses with coordinated efficiency that spoke of careful planning and inside intelligence. Gunfire echoed through the structure like deadly thunder, punctuated by explosive detonations that suggested the attackers were willing to bring down the entire building to eliminate their targets. Jin Woo moved through the penthouse with predatory grace, positioning his people to maximize defensive effectiveness while maintaining communication with teams throughout the building. His tactical competence was absolute, each decision calculated to preserve his forces while inflicting maximum damage on advancing enemies. The first breach came through the service elevator, explosive charges opening the doors to reveal a foreman team equipped with body armor and assault weapons designed for close-quarters combat. Jin Woo's response was immediate and lethal, his fire controlled and precise as he eliminated 2 attackers before they could fully clear the entrance. Amara found herself fighting alongside men who moved with military precision, her own training integrating seamlessly with their tactical protocols. When a second team breached through the emergency stairwell, she was positioned to provide supporting fire that allowed Jin Woo's lieutenant to eliminate the threat without sustaining casualties. The battle raged through the penthouse with controlled violence that transformed elegant living space in a tactical battleground. Expensive furniture became cover, art pieces became improvised weapons, luxury amenities became strategic advantages in the mathematics of survival. Jin Woo fought with the cold efficiency she had witnessed during the restaurant attack, but magnified by defensive fury that made him terrible to observe in action. When enemies threatened his people, he became something beyond human calculation, a force of nature that eliminated opposition with surgical precision. The sniper's bullet came, without warning, punching through reinforced glass that had been designed to resist exactly such attacks. Jin Woo saw the muzzle flash an instant before impact, his body moving to shield Amara from the threat, even as the high-velocity round caught him center mass and sent him sprawling across marble flooring that immediately began turning red with spreading blood. Time crystallized in a hyperreal clarity as Amara watched Jin Woo fall, his dark eyes wide with surprise and something that looked remarkably like regret. The man who had become her anchor in a world of professional violence was suddenly mortal and bleeding, his controlled strength leaking away through a wound that appeared catastrophically serious. "No," she whispered, then louder as tactical training overrode emotional shock. "Medic! I need a medic now." But the building was still under assault, gunfire continuing to echo from multiple directions as Hassan's people pressed their attack with renewed aggression. Jin Woo's lieutenant was coordinating defensive operations with professional competence, but the absence of his leader's tactical brilliance was immediately apparent in the team's decreased efficiency. Amara knelt beside Jin Woo, her hands moving automatically to assess the wound while her mind cataloged the tactical situation with military precision. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, but blood loss was significant and medical attention was impossible while enemies continued to advance through defensive positions. "Stay with me," she commanded, pressing her hands against the entry wound while scanning the tactical displays that showed their deteriorating defensive situation. "You do not get to die and leave me to clean up this mess alone." Jin Woo's eyes focused on her face with effort that suggested he was fighting unconsciousness through sheer determination. "Amara," he said, his voice weak but still carrying the authority that had defined their relationship. "The safe room. Code is your deployment dates. Go now while my men can still cover your extraction." "Not happening." She accepted the rifle that Jin Woo's lieutenant pressed into her hands, the familiar weight triggering muscle memory from countless training exercises and combat operations. "You taught me that we protect what is ours. Well, you are mine now, and I do not abandon my people." The admission surprised them both, but there was no time to process emotional revelations while enemies were systematically eliminating defensive positions throughout the building. Amara moved to the tactical display, her military training asserting itself as she assumed command of operations that required immediate coordination. Jin Woo's men accepted her authority without question, recognizing competence when survival depended on tactical excellence rather than organizational politics. She repositioned their defensive lines to maximize advantage from remaining cover, coordinated ammunition distribution to sustain extended engagement, and established overlapping fields of fire that would channel attackers into predetermined kill zones. The final assault came as Hassan's remaining forces concentrated their strength for decisive breakthrough. understanding that time favored defenders who could receive reinforcement while attackers operated on finite resources. Amara met their advance with controlled violence that would have made her military instructors proud, her fire precise and economical as she eliminated threats with professional efficiency. When the J Brotherhood's leader appeared in the breach, recognizable from intelligence photographs as Hassan's primary lieutenant and the architect of the systematic elimination campaign against her former unit, Amara felt something cold and final settle in her chest. This man had orchestrated the deaths of her teammates, had hunted her across thousands of miles and multiple years, had brought war to the one place she had found safety and acceptance. The shot was perfect, center mass at 40 meters through a gap in defensive cover that existed for perhaps 2 seconds. Hassan's lieutenant dropped with satisfying finality, and with his death, the coordinated assault collapsed as surviving attackers recognized that their primary objective had become impossible to achieve. In the sudden silence that followed the cessation of gunfire, Amara became aware that Jin Woo was struggling to sit upright despite blood loss that should have rendered him unconscious. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an expression she had never seen before, something that transcended professional respect and moved in a territory that made her heart race for reasons having nothing to do with combat adrenaline. "You stayed," he said, wonder evident in his voice despite its weakness. "I told you I do not abandon my people." She knelt beside him again, resuming pressure on his wound while mentally calculating the time until medical assistance could reach them. "And you're definitely my people now." Jin Woo's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his injury. "Amara, listen to me. What I feel for you is not simply professional appreciation or tactical alliance. It is something that makes me willing to die rather than see you harmed." The confession hung between them like bridge spanning a chasm that had seemed impossible to cross through normal means. Amara understood that Jin Woo was offering something more valuable than protection or partnership, something that made her chest tight with emotions she had not expected to feel for a man whose hands were stained with blood from choices she did not fully understand. "I know," she replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty about feelings that had developed despite every rational argument against their compatibility. "I feel the same way about you, which is why you're going to recover from this wound and why we are going to have a very long conversation about what that means for our future." Jin Woo's smile was weak but genuine, transforming his face from coldly handsome to something that made her stomach flutter with anticipation rather than apprehension. When the emergency medical team arrived with equipment that suggested Jin Woo's organization maintained trauma surgical capabilities comparable to military hospitals, Amara remained at his side while they stabilized his condition and prepared him for transport to their secure medical facility. The penthouse bore the scars of combat that would require extensive renovation to repair, but Jin Woo's organization had emerged stronger through successful defense against coordinated assault by multiple enemy factions. Hassan's intelligence network was permanently disrupted. The systematic elimination campaign against her former unit was terminated, and the threat that had forced her into Jin Woo's protection was neutralized through decisive application of superior firepower and tactical competence. As dawn broke over Seattle, painting the damaged windows with golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings, Amara understood that she had found something more valuable than safety in Jin Woo's dangerous world. She had found a place where her strength was appreciated rather than feared, where her military skills served purposes that felt meaningful rather than simply destructive. Most importantly, she had found someone worth protecting with the same absolute dedication that he had shown in safeguarding her life, and that mutual commitment felt strong enough to build a future upon despite the violence that surrounded them both. 3 weeks after the assault, Jin Woo's private medical facility released him with restrictions that he ignored with characteristic determination. The bullet wound had healed cleanly thanks to surgical intervention that rivaled anything available at major trauma centers. But his doctors insisted on continued bed rest that conflicted dramatically with his need to reassert control over operations disrupted by his temporary incapacitation. Amara had spent those weeks coordinating defensive improvements to his various properties, her military expertise proving invaluable for identifying vulnerabilities that traditional security assessments had missed. Jean Wu's organization had emerged stronger from the crisis, with enhanced tactical protocols and respect for her capabilities that elevated her status from protected asset to strategic partner. The penthouse bore no evidence of the violence that had nearly claimed their lives, expensive renovation having restored its elegant perfection while incorporating defensive improvements that would discourage future assault attempts. But the real transformation was visible in the way Jean Wu watched Amara move through spaces that had become theirs rather than his, possession replaced by partnership in ways that surprised them both. The conversation came on a Thursday evening as Seattle rain painted abstract patterns across the reinforced windows, the sound providing gentle background to wine that tasted like liquid celebration. Jean Wu had been unusually quiet during dinner, his dark eyes carrying an intensity that suggested important decisions were crystallizing behind his controlled exterior. "The original terms of our arrangement," he said finally, his voice carrying formal precision that made her stomach flutter with anticipation rather than apprehension, were established under emergency conditions that no longer apply. Amara set down her wine glass with hands that remained perfectly steady despite the magnitude of implications contained in his statement. The protection contract had been the foundation of their relationship, the legal framework that justified her presence in his dangerous world. Its dissolution would change everything between them. "Hassan's network is permanently dismantled," Jean Wu continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "The threat that brought you under my protection has been eliminated through decisive action that demonstrated capabilities neither of us fully understood when we began this arrangement. So I am free to leave," she said, though the words felt strange in her mouth after weeks of thinking about Jean Wu's penthouse as home rather than beautiful prison. "You have always been free to leave." The contract was never about legal obligation, but rather about providing framework for cooperation between equals who possess complementary skills and mutual need for what the other could provide. The admission recontextualized everything that had passed between them, revealing that Jean Wu's control had been carefully balanced with respect for her autonomy in ways she had not fully recognized. He had offered protection, but never demanded submission beyond what survival required. "What are you proposing?" she asked, understanding that this conversation would determine whether their partnership continued beyond the crisis that had created it. Jean Wu rose from his chair with fluid grace that showed no lingering effects from his injury, moving to retrieve something from the secure safe hidden behind artwork that served dual purposes of aesthetic beauty and tactical concealment. When he returned, he carried a small velvet box that made her heart race with possibilities she had not dared consider. "I am proposing that you choose to stay not because circumstances require it, but because you want to build something permanent with someone who understands that your strength makes you more valuable as partner than as possession." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away with its understated elegance. The platinum band was set with a single diamond that caught the ambient light like captured starfire. But more importantly, the design incorporated subtle Korean cultural elements that spoke of identity shared rather than identity surrendered. "Amara Washington," Jean Wu said, dropping to one knee with formal precision that transformed the gesture from romantic cliché into something approaching ceremony. "Will you marry me and help me build an organization where strength is honored regardless of its source and where loyalty flows both directions without reservation?" The proposal carried weight beyond simple romantic commitment, offering partnership that would elevate her from protected asset to equal leader in an enterprise that spanned continents and influenced outcomes far beyond their personal relationship. It was an invitation to power that respected her capabilities while acknowledging his need for what she brought to their collaboration. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty about a future that would be dangerous, challenging, and more meaningful than anything she had imagined possible when she walked away from military service. "But I have conditions." Jean Wu's smile carried genuine amusement, mixed with the satisfaction of someone who had expected exactly such negotiation from a woman who never accepted terms without ensuring her interests were properly protected. Name them. Equal partnership means equal decision-making authority on all major operational matters. My tactical expertise gets the same weight as your business experience, and we do not make moves that affect our organization without mutual agreement. Agreed. What else? We establish legitimate business operations alongside existing enterprises, creating legal revenue streams that allow us to transition toward activities that do not require quite so much violence to maintain market position. Jean Wu nodded slowly, recognizing the strategic wisdom of diversification that would provide stability while reducing exposure to law enforcement attention that could disrupt their operations. Challenging, but achievable. Continue. Any children we have grow up understanding both cultures equally, with knowledge of their heritage from both sides and education that prepares them for leadership in whatever world they choose to inhabit. The mention of children created intimacy that transformed business negotiation into something approaching domestic planning. And Jean Wu's expression softened with possibilities that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. I would be honored to raise children with you who inherit your courage and intelligence. He slipped the ring onto her finger with ceremonial care, the platinum warm against her skin like a promise made tangible through precious metal and engineering precision. The fit was perfect, suggesting that Jean Wu had observed details about her hands during their weeks together with the same attention he applied to tactical intelligence. The kiss that followed carried the weight of everything they had survived together. Transformation from strangers thrown together by circumstance into partners who had chosen each other from positions of strength and mutual respect. When they separated, Amara understood that her life had officially begun a new chapter that would be written in partnership with someone who valued her capabilities as much as her companionship. The wedding took place 6 months later in a ceremony that blended Korean traditions with military honors, reflecting the cultural complexity of their union while honoring the experiences that had shaped them both. Jean Wu's organization provided security that ensured their celebration remained undisturbed by enemies who might view the occasion as opportunity for strategic disruption. Amara wore traditional Korean wedding attire that had been modified to accommodate the military sword ceremony honoring her service, while Jean Wu's formal were incorporated subtle tactical elements that maintained his readiness for threats while respecting ceremonial requirements. The guest list included both his business associates and her former military colleagues who had survived their various conflicts. Their first year of marriage proved that partnership between equals could enhance rather than diminish individual capabilities, with Amara's tactical expertise contributing to organizational expansion while Jean Wu's business acumen provided stability that allowed her to develop new skills in international commerce and strategic planning. The legitimate businesses they established flourished under management that combined his understanding of market dynamics with her appreciation for operational efficiency, creating revenue streams that gradually reduced their dependence on activities that required constant vigilance against law enforcement interference. When their first child was born 18 months after their wedding, a daughter whose dark eyes reflected both parents' intelligence and determination, they understood that their partnership had created something more valuable than successful criminal enterprise or profitable legitimate business. They had built a family foundation strong enough to support whatever challenges their dangerous world might present. The penthouse had been transformed into a home where luxury served comfort rather than intimidation, where defensive capabilities remained but faded into background awareness rather than constant tactical consideration. Their daughter would grow up understanding that strength could be used for protection rather than domination, and that love could flourish even in circumstances where violence remained a professional necessity. On quiet evenings when Seattle spread below them like a circuit board of human activity, Amara and Jean Wu would discuss plans for expansion that balanced ambition with responsibility, growth with sustainability, power with the wisdom to use it carefully. Their organization had become something unique in their world, a criminal enterprise guided by principles that prioritized loyalty and mutual respect over fear and intimidation. Looking back from the comfort of partnership built on mutual choice rather than desperate necessity, Amara often reflected on the restaurant attack that had changed her life trajectory so completely. What had seemed like random violence had actually been the collision that brought her together with someone who understood that true strength came from choosing to stand beside rather than over the people who mattered most. As you think about the power of unexpected encounters and the courage required to choose partnership over safety, consider how the strongest bonds are often forged under the most challenging circumstances, and how love becomes unbreakable when it survives tests that would destroy lesser connections. Their story had become legend within Jean Wu's organization, proof that even in a world where trust was a potentially fatal luxury, two people who recognized strength in each other could build something permanent and beautiful from the chaos of circumstances beyond their control. In the end, the cage had become a sanctuary chosen freely. Protection had evolved into partnership, and what had begun as desperate alliance had transformed into love strong enough to weather whatever storms their dangerous world might bring. And in the quiet moments between crises, that was more than enough foundation upon which to build a lifetime of shared adventures and mutual devotion.